Welcome back, everybody, to the Uncensored CMO. Now, in this episode, we're going to talk about what makes a great CMO. Now, one of the CMOs that I've admired throughout his career is Craig Inglis, who famously was the CMO for John Lewis for many years, making those ads that you saw at Christmas and really defined the genre of Christmas advertising. Now, Craig's done a lot more than just make good ads. He's transformed businesses from digital transformation, customer experience. He's worked at Virgin as well as John Lewis, and now he's at The Entertainer. I wanted to catch up with Craig and find out what it takes to be a great CMO and what are the tips and tricks that he can pass on so you can be a better marketer. It's a great fun, this episode. There's lots you'll get out of it. Here's my interview with Craig. Craig Inglis, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Before we get into John Lewis, tell everyone a little bit about your marketing past. How did you get into marketing? You know, what kind of jobs have you done on your journey to this point?
Well, like many marketeers, I sort of fell into it, not quite knowing what I was doing. And so I did study marketing, though. My first job was at a business was called Thompson Holidays, now called TUI. It was my sort of apprenticeship in marketing. And I joined TUI. I remember being excited by two things. One, that there was a picture of a desert island on the front of the careers brochure. There was brochures back then. And secondly, that their purpose was all about creating dreams for their customers. And I thought, I love a bit of that. Sounds like fun. And that sort of carried me through my career. The kind of, I'm a sucker for a purpose. And so when I left there, I went traveling a bit, and then I joined Virgin. I saw Richard Branson hanging out at the front of a train and talking about how he was going to bring Virgin Atlantic to the rails and revolutionise the UK's railways. And I was very taken with that. And then I joined John Lewis, which is all about a better way of doing business. And again, very taken with that. And then finally, I worked for Sage, and they're all about championing small businesses, which I also loved. So for me, it's been about purpose all the way through. But that's so I've only worked for 4 brands, which I think is relatively lower than normal for a career of sort of 30 years or so.
Yeah, but some very well known and some fun brands by the sounds of it. Yeah. Well, we'll get into a bit more, particularly on John Lewis, of course, because I know dying to get into that and talk a little bit about that. You and I were doing a panel the other day, and one thing that struck me in the debate we were having in the panel was quite how open you were about things that had gone well and things that had gone less well. So I thought I'd just mix it up a little bit in this episode and ask you, tell me a time when it's not gone so well from a marketing point of view and what happened.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking in that panel about some of the big creative moments at John Lewis, and in particular, I was talking about the very first big campaign, which was called Always a Woman, which wasn't a Christmas ad, actually. It was I think it was in May, but it was the first big one that got traction. And it was an absolute disaster from a production point of view. There were lots of bumps in the road. We hadn't really ever done a big, really emotional campaign before. So we're kind of finding our feet. We were quite early in the relationships as well with Adam and Eve. And so I think that was probably the source of the angst that kind of permeated through the shoots. To bring that to life, we basically shot the ending 3 times. We could not agree on the ending, to the point that a week before it was due on air, literally a week before it was due on air, I remember being in my garden on the phone, and we had no ad, we had no director and no production company because we'd all fallen out. So it was resolved by bringing Dougal Wilson, who I ended up working with on multiple ads, and a company called Blink. I got him to my local pub. And we had a couple of drinks and a lunch, and in that lunch we sorted out the challenges we had, and the following day we reshot the ending down my local park, and myself and James Murphy, who's the founder of Adam and Eve, were there as basically runners, because we had to bring this together really quickly. So we kind of pulled it out of the bag in the end, but that was an almighty disaster in terms of the production. But actually, it became probably our biggest success. At least at that time, it was the one that kind of started it all off. So yeah, and there's lots of stories like that. These sorts of levels of creativity, they are filled with tension, and I think actually in many ways that's where the kind of magic comes from.
It's amazing, isn't it, how many times that some of these situations end up like being the best outcomes, aren't they? Sometimes, are born through the. I remember probably.
It doesn't feel like that at the time.
It doesn't, does it? I know it feels like a disaster, but often ends up being good. I think the most challenging situation I was in once. I was working on, do you know the liqueur, di Serrano Amaretto?
Yeah.
The
Love
kind
it.
of almond liqueur.
Yeah.
It's beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah.
I was
guilty pleasure.
It is lovely, isn't it? Like particularly Christmas, it's, really popular. I was a young brand. I said it was my first brand manager job. So I was probably like 23, 24, something like this, trying to make my mark, desperate to do something cut through. And this is back in 2002. And I was working with the London Underground, and I was inspired by when you go into a supermarket, you get the bakery smell, like you get the waft of like fresh bread, and you go, oh, that's amazing. I'll wander over and get some bread. And I had this idea, and I was going to waft the smell of amaretto through the Underground. And I'd done this deal with the Underground's impact team, and we'd put these scent emitters, and I'd worked with some perfume houses to get exactly the scent of amaretto.
A wafting strategy.
Exactly, a wafting strategy. And I'd taken these, all the billboards as you go down the escalators. This was before they were digital, of course. Actually, they were actually billboards.
Yeah.
And then we had little sampling teams. So basically, you'd go through the Underground, you'd smell it, you'd see it, and you'd taste it. And I just thought this was genius.
Sounds great so far.
I know, exactly. I was just like, this is my Christmas.
There is a butt coming.
Yeah, there's a butt coming eventually. This is my kind of master Christmas plan. And I'd spent 6 months and got all the sign off for it. Everything was ready. And it was due to go live on the Monday. Now, they say timing is everything, because this is 2002. And on the Monday, there was a potential terror attack because we're about to go to war with Iraq. And the Home Office presented some new guidelines to the public. Front page of The Sun that morning on the Monday, 9 a.m, was the public are warned to be vigilant for the threat of a cyanide attack in London, in the London Underground. Please look out for the smell of almonds.
Oh, no.
And Di Serrano smells of almonds.
So you could not make that.
I know, you couldn't make it up, could you? So I was at a trade show. I mean, I was like, junior brand manager at a trade show, giving out samples or whatever. And then I picked up my phone at lunch, and it was just off the hook with journalists going, "Can you comment on what's going on?" And then I discovered. So I was in all these papers,
horrendous.
And I was even made "Have I Got News for You" at the weekend. It was the story.
Oh, I did end up on the front of the Daily Mail as well.
I was going to say, I think you've got history in this one as well.
I do. I've forgotten about that. I've kind of tried to get it out of my brain, but I in what became known as Beigegate at John Lewis, I was misquoted, I must say, from a room. I innocuously was presenting at an agency on our strategy, and I think I was only maybe a year or so into John Lewis, and so basically I was giving my reflections a year in. And what I said is that John Lewis had been known for being beige for quite a long time. And actually, that's not what I saw. I saw a business that was much more colourful, that was rich, and was kind of very design-led, very entrepreneurial in all its aspects. And so my job as marketing director was to bring it to life. So I was very much coming from the right place. Unfortunately, the headline, which I think was in Marketing Week, said, "Inglis says John Lewis is beige." And it was pretty disparaging. And then Janet Street Porter, who's a big John Lewis fan, picked it up and basically called for my head, and it made its way onto the front page. And also India Knight did the same, I think, in the Times. And so it became this huge furore, this innocuous comment at an agency one morning.
Did you not know there were journalists in the room then? I mean, how did it get out?
I did actually ask. No, so I did say, look, is this Chatham House Rules and other journalists? And the answer was no. So I didn't check the list. Now, I should have checked the list, but I've checked every list since. And any talk I ever do, I always assume the worst now. I always assume it could end up in the Daily Mail. Because you sort of think no one's interested. But they are. They are interested. They're interested in brands like Di Serrano or John Lewis, brands, because you put your head above the parapet when you start to tell the story of these brands. And inevitably that means that you become part of the story if something goes awry.
And I think particularly for brands like John Lewis, who are kind of national treasure brands, aren't they, where everyone has an affinity for them and they're very high profile.
They feel like they own them.
They do. It feels like it's our brand, and how dare you mess with our brand.
How very dare you? And so when John Lewis customers, when they talk about John Lewis, they talk about it as the mothership.
Yeah.
That's an often used phrase, and so John Betjeman was famed for saying that, if there was a nuclear war, you should go to John Lewis because nothing bad ever happens there. and so when you've got an institution like that, you've got to be very careful about how you talk about it and criticize it at your peril. And that was certainly not my intent. But anyway, there you go. You live and learn.
Now, you talked at the beginning about you had 4 stints, so you've had quite long stints as a CMO. Asking for a friend, really, on this question, which is like, what's the secret to surviving a long tenure as a CMO? We've all read the stories about how short the CMO tenure is. I managed to get myself fired twice in a year, so I'd be quite interested in the answers to this one. But tell me, what's the secret to longevity and making a big impact in the long term?
It's a really good question. I want to hear how you got fired twice in a year, but well, in no small part, as I said earlier, I joined the businesses that I joined quite intentionally. So the purpose, at least for me, was really important, and having that affinity between what I believe in and the business that I'm working for is really important. And so I had that affinity in all of those brands. And in actually 3 out of the 4 cases, when I joined as part of a kind of bigger team, a bigger restructure. And a year in, most of who I joined with had gone, and I was still there. And so I kind of got I'm quite resilient, and that resilience was drawn from the belief in the mission, belief in what we're doing. If I think about, particularly if I tell you about Virgin Trains, I joined a Virgin company, or so I thought. And as I said, I was seduced by Richard Branson and everything that went with that. What I actually joined was an underinvested part of the civil service. And it was the first Virgin business that wasn't a startup. And so here we were walking into a culture where it was about as far from a Virgin business as you could imagine. And here we were kind of full of razzmatazz, trying to turn it into this Virgin entrepreneurial culture. And that was never going to happen overnight. And indeed, investing in rolling stock and redesigning trains and redesigning the track, it's never going to be done overnight. So we were totally unrealistic about how long it would take. But so my belief in the mission, was what saw me through some really quite dark times. And I don't know how far back you remember, but at that time there was Network Rail was a company called Railtrack, and it went bust. And as a consequence, the whole rail network went into meltdown overnight, literally overnight. And so we were suddenly faced with these 20 mile an hour speed limits, which caused all the timetables to fail and so on. So we were basically never out of the press for all the wrong reasons. And I stuck with it because it mattered and because I cared about it, and I believed we could get there, and we did. And so, similarly to John Lewis, I really believed in this idea of the better way of doing business. And what I entered was a business that had that at its heart. But there was no conversation about brand. Brand wasn't even a word that really people used. And there was a sort of collective lack of confidence, lack of understanding about the role that marketing could play. And so whilst I'd arrived in this amazing business, I could see the opportunity to drive positive change by shining a light on everything that was special about John Lewis. And that's what we did over the course of time. And it does take time. And so, I think if you're really going to make an impact, a really serious impact, you've got to give it that sort of time. And it's hard to make a difference in
really
a couple of years, never mind 6
Yeah.
months. So
I know, exactly. 3 months, I know.
Yeah. I think Mark Ritson said recently that if you really want to cut through with a brand strategy, you need 10 years of consistency.
Yeah.
And I think that's about right.
There's a lot of evidence to support that, actually. I mean, again, if we look at the System 1 database, the brands that have done the best over the longest periods, so if you take like Audi with Kevin the Carrot, for example, they've consistently done the same thing year in, year out and learnt from it and grown very, very successfully. But you're right. I mean, there's a lot to be said for consistency. It's very, very underrated.
I mean, famously, we didn't change the John Lewis Christmas strategy over the 10 years or so that I was running it, and that was very intentional. I think some people thought it was laziness, and it really wasn't, so we absolutely poked at it and were open-minded to change it. And every year we went round the block on whether we should change it. But it was right. It was right for a reason.
Yeah. I want to ask you about the CMO role, perception versus reality. Because, I mean, I guess most people think, CMO spends their time out making ads and, meeting their agency for lunch on a Friday. But the reality of a CMO role is very different, I think, to what maybe people perceive it. I know, so in my limited experience, I've often found the jump quite a big one, because suddenly you're on a board, you're actually not talking about marketing. I remember, like when I was first on a board, the marketing would be about 10% of the topics we'd discuss. And very often the last topic, we're talking about, the factory and the insurance and the, what we're going to pay rises for the following year, be all those kind of operational topics. So the actual role is quite different, I think, often to the one people may perceive from the outside.
Yeah,
Has that been your experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So the stuff we're just talking about now, the John Lewis campaigns, it's about, 5% of the job, max. The reality is I spent about 60% of my time with the board talking about board stuff, running the business, everything from warehouses to lorries and the loos and the shops and escalators and everything in between, and so you have to have a point of view as a board member. You've got to park your functional responsibility and have a point of view on how you run the business, I think. So to some extent, your question is answered by what's a board member, and a board member is someone who has interest and knowledge and a perspective. I mean, legally, you have to have a point of view, right? It's there in your sort of responsibilities and as a director, and so that's a big part of it. But I think in terms of being a CMO on a board, there's a number of things that you can bring that are a bit different to perhaps some of the other board members. And I think I'd probably sum them up at maybe three things. So first of all, typically, not always, but typically, and certainly this is the case for me, is you have credibility both commercially and sort of analytically, but also creatively and intuitively, and it's the combination of those two things, I think, which typically define a CMO as being a bit different to maybe some of the other voices around the table. So, and you dial that up and dial that down depending on whatever it is that you're talking about. And certainly, if I think about the boards I've been part of, that would be the thing that I would particularly bring, is that, and particularly that intuitive side, and be prepared to just challenge the kind of status quo a bit. So that's really important. I think secondly, customer obsession is really important. So, I have always had a sort of intuitive feel for what matters to customers, and I really care about it. And so I can get very passionate about it. And when I joined the John Lewis board, marketing and customer was pretty low down the agenda and tended to be the bit at the end, in truth. And we focused on big operational, functional or financial matters, all of which are really important, of course. But I'm proud to say that we changed that over the course of time, and the customer became the first thing that we talked about in that board. So, incredibly important. And then maybe the third thing it defines a CMO as a bit different is storytelling. Typically, as you well know, there's a lot of opinions about marketing because everyone is a consumer. And so inevitably, it's one of the great strengths about what we do. It's one of the reasons why we do it, but it's also one of the things that holds us back. And so I think as a board member, you've got to be able to engage. You've got to be able to take people with you and tell the story of why you're doing what you're doing, why you're doing it on behalf of customers, and what it would do for change for the business. And not just in the board, but beyond, right? And so I think you could argue maybe every board member has to do that in some way, but particularly CMOs, that's a fundamental ask of what we do.
Oh, that's very solid advice. Actually, to your second point, one of my favourite Mark Ritson quotes is, the job of the CMO is to represent the consumer where decisions are getting made.
Absolutely.
And I think that's absolutely spot on. And I think if I look at my most effective parts of my career, it's been when I've been closest to my customer and best able to articulate. Because if you say I've just come back from, talking to the customer on the customer care line, or I've just been out seeing our customers, or I've just been spending a day in trade, the credibility it gives you to speak on behalf of the people that you're serving is enormous.
But that's how you cut through all the politics. All the board nonsense. Every board's got that, right? Every business has got that. You cut through by turning to the customer. You reference the customer, and suddenly you take all the heat out of it. All the politics disappears because it's not opinion anymore. It's fact. It's fact. And as long as you can connect doing the right thing for customers and how that connects to driving a great commercial result, then you're onto a winner every time. And I think, to your point a minute ago, the thing I always say to teams is, I need to believe that when we aren't all together as a marketing team, that any one of you, no matter your seniority in the team, will be able to represent the customer in the room and be prepared to be the lone voice in the room. Be prepared to flow against the tide of what's being said, the groupthink in the room, and do the right thing. And, to do that takes some confidence. And so building that capability is really important.
And I think linked to that, actually, the other unique thing I've noticed is that the CMO is uniquely positioned to take a longer term view than most of the other functions. Because most functions are, did we deliver on time in full? Did we hit the profit number? What's our customer, what's our employee satisfaction results? They're very, very in the moment, aren't they? They're just a snapshot in time. But I think the CMO is building the plan to look long term, thinking about where we're going next, thinking about what we're going to do next. And that's a unique role, really. Probably only the CEO is going to have probably a longer term view than the CMO.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I mean, albeit I don't think it's exclusive. If you can get the right relationships in a board like that, the whole board should hold that tension between short and long term. And hold that very consciously. And I've been lucky enough to mainly work for businesses that are private. And so your ability to do that, particularly at John Lewis, because it's employee owned, that ability to kind of focus on the bigger picture and do the right thing for the long term, sometimes at the cost of the short term, was something I actually took great pride in. So, and I would say that was, from the CEO down.
Yeah, and famous for it as well, isn't it? You're well known for taking that position.
Yeah.
I had a go at writing the 4 Ps for the CMO. So, which I ended up with people, planning, politics, and persuasion. Because actually, if I look at the time I spent on, as a CMO, the amount of time you're thinking about people in terms of organization, roles, that kind of thing, planning ahead, constantly planning ahead. Politics, I think it's one of those things no one really likes to admit, but you need to sort of be able to navigate politics. And persuasion, there's a lot of kind of persuading people internally, externally, to make things happen. And there's an art to all that, isn't there?
Mm. I tell you what, you're a brave man rewriting the 4 Ps.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, Mark Ritson's not listening.
He's not going to be happy with me.
Does he listen to this podcast?
Yes, exactly.
I don't know.
He does actually.
He doesn't like the rewriting of the 4 Ps, and quite right too. I'd probably, I think they're probably the same thing, but I'd boil it down to 2 things. I think, so first, you got to set a clear, compelling vision. You got to get people excited about where we're going. And then boil that down into clear objectives. Yeah. But that's the one really big thing you can do. And the second is create the conditions for people to thrive. And that's multifaceted, but it covers probably the other 3 Ps you identify. Broadly, it's culture, right? So what kind of place is it? Do we want to work in? What kind of relationships do we need to have for that to happen? What does great communication look like? All of that, I think, becomes the job. And, I think about the time when I moved onto the John Lewis board, and, I'd sort of, like most of us, I'd grown up and been rewarded for being a master of my craft, which is relatively narrow and deep. And then suddenly you find yourself, in my case, I had 600 people working for me, and you're a master of nothing. And so I remember feeling a little bit lost, because I had 6-7 people in my leadership team, all been chosen to kind of do their job, including a new marketing director, an amazing woman called Becky Brock, who I recruited to replace me. And so suddenly the thing that I'd been anchored to was no longer my thing. And then it took me a while. It took me about a year. I'm a bit slow in the uptake, but I realized that actually the job is the 2 things I've just said. It's like the 2 things that only I can do is set the vision and really build the culture. And a huge part of the job is communication. 40% of the job, I would say. So it took me a while to get my head around that.
That is such good advice. I know exactly what you're talking about. I've been in that position where it's weird that you're not making decisions on packaging or not signing off the brief or not, you're like,
let me in.
and then when it gets presented back, you're sat there going, well, this is what I'd have done.
Yeah.
What do I do now? Do I coach or do I feedback or what happens?
You do have to decide the things that are worth getting in on.
Yeah.
And someone asked me just the other day, like, where do you sit on the continuum of micromanagement at one end and complete empowerment at the other? And I think the reality is we all move along that continuum.
Yeah.
And there are some things, like say John Lewis Christmas, where I would step in much more detail because the stakes are high. And that's not to say I didn't have trust. I absolutely did. But there's some things where you just have to be on the hook for the detail. So choosing those moments is everything.
Was it Richard Branson that said his advice was hire people better than you, then get out of their way? Have I made that up? Was that a quote from him?
I think we can go with it.
Yeah, it sounds good.
Kind of
thing
you would say, along with
so hiring really, really good people to do the job.
I'm such a believer in that. You're only as good as the people around you.
Totally.
Bit of a cliche, but it's so true. And I realized that in that very team I just described, that the only way we were going to be able to really deliver for the customer at John Lewis and this new team was through exactly that, through having a brilliantly diverse team. I mean, diversity in its broadest sense around that table, with real tension, real healthy creative tension, because you always get to a better result. And the only way that you can have that tension and for it not to cause a spiral is if you've got the right relationships, and relationships which have implicit trust in them. And I think as the leader, that's the job that only you can do is to create the time, the space, and the energy for those relationships to be built, and out of that comes the magic. It's such a it's a very meandering, bumpy thing. It's not straightforward. There's no straight line to it.
There's not, is there?
But that's the job. That's what we do.
Now, he talks about being in all the detail for the John Lewis Christmas ads. I thought I'd put you to the test here. So I've jumped on the System One database and pulled off a few face traces.
I don't like the sound of it.
Exactly. Look at the emotional response to some of your campaigns. And I thought I'd see if you can guess by the emotional response which campaign we're talking about. So
I can't even remember the ads.
I'll put a couple in front of you, and then we can discuss them. So this top one here, See if I can explain to everyone listening what we're looking at here is the grey area is neutrality. The lovely green area down here is happiness. So in this example,
it's black and white, John.
I know exactly. So we're cutting costs on uncensored CMO. So for anyone watching, I'll point this to camera as well. You can see the black and white face. It's a new invention. It's like guess the colour. But what we got here,
the green is the block in the middle there.
So green is the block in the middle. So what you've got here is about half the people feel happy by the end, and you've got this lovely gradual rise in happiness throughout. Which ad do you think that one is?
So there's no drop.
No drop. It's constant rise throughout.
Always a woman?
Yes. Well done. There you go. So all your re-editing and all your work down the pub paid off at the end. So nice peak end.
Yeah,
so
that's great.
So that was a good one.
Is that a good shape? Is that system one?
That's very good. It's very good. Not quite as good as
right.
The next two, and I've had to put them together actually because there are two ads that you've made that have both followed a very similar pattern, and these are the two highest scoring. In fact, there's not a lot between them in the results. The two highest scoring ads on our database of yours. And what, again, for the people listening, what we've got here is we've got very little neutrality. So most people are feeling something throughout. Biggest challenge, by the way, make people feel something.
Absolutely.
Most advertising doesn't, right? So number one challenge. Now at the top here, we've got blue. Again, can you guess?
I mean,
there you go. Shades of grey at the moment. Anyway, blue, and blue is sadness. So in both these ads, what you've done is about halfway through, you've created quite a serious amount of jeopardy for the audience. And that's quite a lot of sadness. That's a serious amount of sadness. Now, what you've done very well in both is you've resolved it very quickly to the extent that you see this enormous happiness at the end. Now that's very, very rare to get. You're talking about 75-80% of the audience by the end are feeling nothing but happiness. And both of them also have an element of surprise as in the final third as you do the big reveal.
Okay.
So can you guess which two ads those are?
That construct is what we tried to get on every ad. The kind of the jeopardy and then the resolution and so on. So, but we did it to varying degrees of success. I would say Monty the Penguin and Edgar the Dragon, maybe The Long Way. But those I think are the ones.
Yeah, exactly right. So Monty the Penguin, Edgar. Yes.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. So well done.
Which is which?
You can keep the job.
Oh, thank you.
Well, actually, interesting. We're getting into the micro details now. The slightly more extreme one was Edgar. So Edgar, in fact, at System 1, we use Edgar as an example of story arc, or the best way to use negative tension. Because it's an interesting insight, this actually, that most people, when they introduce jeopardy or sadness into an ad, never quite resolve it. Because negative emotions hang around a bit longer than positive emotions. So what we find is people do, let's frighten you, and then right at the end, we'll make you feel happy. And then, of course, people are still left with that negative emotion. What you did brilliantly, though, is you kind of created this happiness to begin with. You then had the twist, but then the resolution was so strong at the end. And Edgar did that, most spectacularly.
Oh, that's good. Great to hear. I'm sure we must have seen that at the time, but I don't remember it. I bet the audience think I knew these in advance, by the way, and I didn't. But funnily enough, on Edgar, that script was presented over 2 or 3 years, and a couple of times I rejected it because we just weren't happy that the resolution was strong enough. I mean, if you remember the ad.
Just describe the resolution, because actually it's a very clever resolution, isn't it?
But before the resolution, there's a point where he takes himself off on his own. And is in a darkened room and doesn't want to be with his friends, and we're just like, this is not Christmas. This is not good. This poor little dragon. And I can't remember what the original resolution was, but it wasn't strong enough. And so what we ended up with was that the flames that he couldn't control became the lighting of a Christmas pudding at this huge feast. And there's just this lovely sort of reveal at the end, and then there's kind of a bit of comedy moment when everyone relaxes because they think they're about to get flamed. So there's a bit of humor in there at the end, which kind of lightens the whole moment. So that kind of makes it. But had we not had that, it just doesn't work. So and same on Monty and all the others, I think.
Yeah, very. Now, obviously, we look back now with nostalgia, looking at John Lewis ads, and I mean, everywhere I go, if I mention John Lewis, everyone knows, how synonymous John Lewis is with Christmas and emotional advertising.
Yeah.
But if you go back to the beginning of your journey, how did you say? Because retailers are famously rational, aren't they? And focused on service and price and value and those kind of things. How did you kind of get the strategy away within the organization?
I'd say in every job I've ever done, and no different at John Lewis, is about the customer. It's about the customer insight. And so we had a big old piece of customer insight when I joined. And bear in mind, as I said earlier, this is a business that wasn't known for its marketing. It actually had a pretty bumpy relationship with marketing, and I'd only had a team for a few years when I joined. And there was almost an innate sense of being a bit anti-marketing in a way, because the kind of unwritten rule within the business is don't over-promote yourself. If you get the product right, people will come, and that was pretty strong feeling within the business. And so when we were kind of building this strategy, it was really important to kind of root it in kind of really clear customer insight, which was that whilst many people would say to me, "I love John Lewis," and there would be talk about the stories of why they love John Lewis, and it typically went back to being a kid and getting school uniform, or their first baby, or the first flat, or whatever. Actually, in reality, when we broke down the brand equity, it was nearly all about, so John Lewis did better than its competitors on things like reliability and trust and delivery, right? So things that were rational drivers. On emotional drivers, did a lot less well. So no better than its competitors. And so the way I looked at that was like, oh, hold on. John Lewis sells things that you basically either put on your body or in your home. So they are inherently emotional. It's a business run by its partners, where they give this kind of lovely, warm service at its best, and you remember the people. All the cues come from the people. So that's inherently emotional. And yet, and we're creating desire. This is a department store. There's nothing you need from John Lewis. It's all about want. And so we got to create this emotional bondedness. And become known for that. And so that was the beginnings of the strategy, was rooted in that insight, and it carried on through. And I'm glad to say that we changed that relationship massively, and bondedness became the driver of greater frequency and higher share of wallet. So it was a commerciality at the end of it all, but that was the fundamentals.
Yeah, that's good there, because you got clear vision, you got some good data to back it, to base it on, that other people could understand. I've got a listener question actually. So Claire messaged me last night, and she was saying, any advice for selling in bold, creative ideas to sort of very rational CEOs, CFOs, because every marketer wants to make that kind of famous, award-winning, impactful kind of creative work, but often you've got quite a few decision makers around you that may not see the world in the same kind of way. So what advice would you give to someone in her position selling in a big idea?
Well, to some extent, I think we were just talking about it. So I would say you have to start with solid insight. You've got to start with really solid data that tells the story of why this is, what's the change that you're trying to affect, and what's the customer behavior change you should expect to see within the business. And then what's the commercial outcome as a consequence of changing that behavior? That's the thread, the story you've got to tell. Before you get anywhere near a creative idea, that's the story. You've got to get clear on that, and therefore what's the need what's the exam question, if you like. So getting clarity on that, I think, then leads to right. So therefore the resolution is, this is how we're going to solve the problem. And I think being clear on roles as you go through a creative process is incredibly important. And so I would say investing time upstream with the CEO and others, so that you get really clear on that brand strategy, get really clear on how you're going to measure it, what success looks like, and be involving up front, means that you have a lot less pain later. Because the last thing you need is a CEO or anyone else stepping in at the point where you're about to.
It's a horrible moment, isn't it?
deliver.
Where you get quite far through a process, and then you do the reveal and you go, oh, this isn't going to work.
I don't really like it. Yeah. And actually, to be honest, I've had loads of those. I had that on Monty the Penguin. I remember vividly presenting it to a room and had a really pretty bad response. Actually, no response. Like you said earlier.
To Monty,
the last
really?
thing you want is a vanilla response. Yeah. And I remember it was a really flat room. And the CEO just saying, like, I don't really get it. And that's a moment where, I had to hold my course. And luckily up front, we'd already had the conversation, the difficult conversation that says, okay, well look, who's on the hook here? Who's got the decision, particularly if you disagree? And you have to have that conversation. And it was very clear. I was lucky to have several CEOs at John Lewis, all of whom said, look, I know I'm not the best person to make creative decisions. Therefore, you're on the hook. Yeah. Now, there's obviously some jeopardy that comes with that personally as well, but that was, in a way, the making of those campaigns, because there was a relatively small team and a consistent team, both within the business and in our agencies, who made the work. And we all knew absolutely clearly who was on the hook. And so, in the end, you got to make the decisions. And so the John Lewis CEO would see it the day before the public. And, that became a thing. But that did mean that I had moments like that with Monty. Yeah. And so the day after, I remember pushing the button and there was no actual button, but
yes. we
the
proverbial button.
The proverbial button. And actually, being pretty terrified that maybe that room was representative of how it was going to be. Now, in the end, it was far from that. But
I love your question about if we disagree, who decides?
Yeah.
That's really good because then you're going to take away the ambiguity up front. When you get to that decision-making point, you've already taken that problem away, haven't you, in terms of what happens next. The other thing, actually, I noticed as well in my career is some of the most creative, bold work has been done where it's been a much smaller budget or there hasn't been as much at stake. And you can almost play. It's almost like the bigger the stakes, the more you have to involve people and the more risk there is, quote unquote. But sometimes you can play in the margins a bit to almost prove something and then, then scale it up from there. That's another route through, I think, that can
Absolutely.
work.
Yeah, definitely. And I think particularly, it's with campaigns or indeed any innovation, so for quite a few years, I ran johnlewis.com. I run an e-commerce team now at The Entertainer, and so a lot of the work we do is iterative. We have agile teams, and we run in sprints, and we build small, and we get it in front of customers, MVPs, and we iterate. And that sort of test and learn thinking, I think, if you can bring that into other parts of the business, including marketing, it's no bad thing, I think, and learn as you go and be prepared to kind of change course means that you're not betting the farm every time and sometimes you have to do that too, but you're not betting the farm and you can learn as you go. It's really important, I think.
Now I really felt your emotion there when you talk about the presenting Monty to the room. Of course, Monty was one of the most successful ads John Lewis ever made. How did you then assess the impact on the business as a result of that campaign afterwards?
Well, it was multifaceted. And every board I've ever worked as part of has wanted a kind of a single measure of success, and in my experience, it just doesn't exist. And so I think most retailers, at least, we use the combination of three things really. So sort of we had the immediacy of digital analytics, which is great. It's it's there and then. It's a great commercial litmus test for how you're doing, along with things like social listening. So you're right there in the moment, and you can understand sentiment really quickly and so on. And so those immediate tests are really important. And beyond that, it's about things like attribution modeling, econometrics. A huge part of our story. It's fundamental, really, as well as Insight like System 1, understanding how, the impact upon the brand. And so it's a multifaceted measurement framework, which, again, really important to agree up front. So before you get to that point and suddenly everyone's surprised that you think it's successful and they don't see it as successful, you agree up front what the measures of success are with the CEO, with the CFO. And I think, what's really important, one of the I often get asked, what are the secrets of the John Lewis success? And there's no one thing, like there just isn't. But one of the things is that the relationship that I had and my team had with finance was a really strong relationship, really positive relationship. They felt on the hook for our econometrics, not the marketing team. And
so the finance team felt on the hook for
absolutely.
Wow.
So we intentionally changed it. So when I first took it on, the marketing team ran the econometrics, and so we reported back to the business. And there was just always a sense of marking your own homework.
Oh,
of course, and any insight, there's a bit of cynicism. And so, I remember having the conversation with the CFO and saying, well, look, if you feel this way, you feel the cynical, you've got to move from being an observer to being an owner. Like, you've got to own this. And I'm very happy to give it up. You take it and let's work in partnership. And that's what we did. And we changed the team that we were working with, the agency we were working with, and she took responsibility for our econometrics, which was a pivot point, I think. And then I really knew it was working when they started to use that econometrics, not just in measuring our marketing, but in our financial planning. So in our sort of economic forecasting and so on. So when you get to that point, look, there's real, this is a team sport. It's not just about the CMO. Everybody in the room, from the CEO through the CFO and everyone else, needs to feel skin in the game, because this is important. It's as important as investing in a warehouse or whatever it is, So that was one of the real keys, is that relationship.
I mean, one of the fascinating things I think about some of the John Lewis work is how it's done long and short, both. Because actually, one of the things you're famous for was creating the buzz around Christmas. It was almost a bit like Christmas hasn't started until we've seen the John Lewis ad. And the amount of engagement online and buying the toys in store and the whole thing was incredible, wasn't it? Equally, of course, you're doing advertising to build a brand in the long term, aren't you? And you seem to manage to get that balance right. How do you decide between, focus in the short and focus on the long in that case?
That on the short versus long term debate, I think as soon as you think it's one versus the other, you've got a problem. So I've never seen it as one versus the other, and you've got to hold the tension, I think, really consciously and have very transparent and conscious conversations about short v long term, and it particularly impacts upon your media choice, of course. And, all I can say is that when John Lewis was at its best commercially and, the ROIs that we drove were market beating, it was when we had what might be seen as a kind of long-term, more emotional medium like TV, combined with what might be seen as typically short-term like PPC. When you've got those in play and and they're the right channels for your target audience, most importantly, then that's when you get rock and rolling. It works and you get a compound effect. And, in John Lewis's case, we had ROIs at sort of 22 to 1 when we had those things in play and every channel lined up and consistent with a consistent storyline, but with a message that's appropriate to the channel. So I don't think that's rocket science. But it's definitely not about long versus short. We like any retailer, like any commercial business, hitting those short-term numbers are incredibly important. And just constantly being prepared to just be able to, take a left turn, take a right turn, and be agile as you optimize those channels as you travel through a campaign is really important. But never being prepared to never give up on the long term purely for the short term, or vice versa.
To quote our friend Ritson again, his quote about the most important word in the long and the short of it is "and."
Yeah,
which is absolutely right.
So true.
If I can move a little bit to customer experience, because I think you can build as much desire for your brand as possible through advertising, as you have done very successfully. But it's nothing without a great customer experience. I know that's something that you've led in John Lewis. So what did you do at John Lewis to transform the customer experience, and how important is that?
Well, funnily enough, you're right. I mean, none of the marketing would have happened without the customer experience. And in fact, the strategy was rooted in the customer experience. So I talked earlier about insight. One of the insights we found was that all the cues for the brand came from the people, to some extent from the shops as well. Absolutely not from digital. So the digital experience neither added nor took away from how the brand was seen, but it was all really rooted in the experience that you have with a human being in a moment where you get some amazing service. And so that was fundamental. And so and that's never more true than at Christmas, when people feel a sense of anxiety about getting just the right thing for the people they love. And so that was the anchor point for this strategy, which is all around thoughtful gifting, this thought that you should go the extra mile for the people you love at Christmas. And really nearly every campaign had that as the kind of core thread throughout it. So it was rooted in the customer experience. Now, that means, of course, that if you're going to tell that story and tell it again and again and again, you have to be able to live up to it. And so at the very same time as we were running those campaigns, we were also investing really heavily in making sure that we could keep that warmth and keep moving the proposition along, keep it relevant. And to be honest with you, as we kind of made the shift, as most retailers have done, from only really serving shops to suddenly having this huge digital operation, John Lewis went through a period of feeling pretty under duress because the infrastructure was just starting to creak at the seams. It wasn't built for everything that comes with running an e-commerce business. And so that's a big transition that businesses have to make. It really challenges your profitability. And you've got to make some pretty big capital investments in warehousing and fulfillment. And so whilst we went through that journey, we had to put, we saw complaints rising, we saw NPS dropping. And that's when I became customer director. And so my focus in the first year or so was almost entirely on fixing those issues, identifying where the problems were. And it's often rooted in things like delivery and returns and refunds, how we handled complaints or not. So really gritty stuff. And so my energy was there on that. And I'm pleased to say that, we returned John Lewis to his rightful place. And I think we dropped from something like first in the customer satisfaction index in the UK to about 8th or 9th, and we got it back to first. But that felt tense because that's such at the heart of the business. And And you can't, we felt like, can we still tell these stories? Can we authentically tell the stories? And I think had we let that go and had we not put the energy and effort and time and money into fixing it, maybe that would have been challenged. But we did, because we all knew how important it was.
Yeah. It resonates a lot, actually. I mean, even in my job at System One, we when I joined, we were a pure consultancy, effectively, and everything was bespoke and human to human sort of thing. And then we've been on this massive, transformation digitally, so that 80-90% of what we do is kind of automated and so on. And we've learned a lot, because it's a massive difference in terms of how we deliver, the speed and the way things are delivered and the level of flexibility and that kind of thing. And it's been amazing learning, actually. But I mean, we've probably gone from overly customized to overly standardized, sort of thing. And we're learning to, just redress that balance a bit, that there's a reason people want something done a little bit differently every now and then, sort of thing, customized to their needs. So getting that balance right has been a massive learning. And you don't want to automate everything. I mean, I remember in the debates, because I'm heavily involved in our kind of product development over the last few years, is I actually want inbuilt human disruption, as I want, blocks in the road that mean you have to speak to someone, because it's an opportunity to understand them. It's an opportunity to, show them what else we can do. It's funny, it's just getting the balance right. And in digital is assuming you can just digitize everything and everything be fine is,
I'd go even further than that. I think that, bear in mind, I'm someone who I've had digital as part of my career since way back in my Virgin days when e-commerce first became a thing. And so I'm a huge advocate. But, you step back a bit and think about how digital has changed our lives. I think there's a real risk that the acceleration of digital, particularly during COVID, has accentuated some of the things that we're already seeing. But so particularly if you think about consumers and think about the feeling of time shortness, right? That's been a thing for as long as I can remember, and it increases every year. And if you look at what we can do with our phones now, technically our lives are way more efficient. We can multitask much easier, but it doesn't feel like that.
No,
you feel more busy, you feel more overwhelmed, and more time short. And I think that is a really big consequence for brands, because at the same time as that, consumers are more empowered than ever. They've got more knowledge than ever. They're more knowledgeable because the knowledge is at their fingertips, almost infinite knowledge. They're more demanding than they've ever been because of ratings and reviews and so on. You can see right in front of you really quickly what good looks like and what bad looks like. And as a consequence, they're more discerning. And so they can switch allegiance really quickly. They can make choices really quickly to move from one brand to another. And I think they're seeking either for a brand to either make their lives easier or to enrich their life in some way. And your human example is enriching someone's experience. And that's very much what we saw at John Lewis, was the shift from just kind of a very functional product transactional experience to, I want you to enrich my life in some way. So at the same time as that, because of digitization, actually everything's gone a bit vanilla.
Yeah.
I don't know if you feel this, but
totally.
So many businesses really sell the same things in the same way, and it kind of looks the same and feels the same. And that's not good. And that's really not good. I think we need to do the opposite, because all things being equal, the brand and how you connect emotionally, typically with humanity at its center, is the thing that will lift you above your competition.
I couldn't agree more. My other passion point on this is our job should also be to make it easier for the consumer, not harder. And I think sometimes with digitization, we almost push our own internal complexity onto the customer. We self-serve is sold as like a benefit, isn't it? But really, we just want, we'll let our customers kind of figure everything out and do all the work themselves. I mean, going back to the System One thing, we had this on our platform. You can upload your own ads and test your own ads and get all the reports and never have to speak to somebody. But we found 96% of people still wanted to talk to someone. And it was like, well, there you go then. It's like, actually, because, you learn about the product, you get to ask questions, you get help when you need it, you're not stuck on your own, all that kind of stuff, because it's so important. We forget that just because we can automate something doesn't mean we should.
Well, that's one of the things that marketeers can do, right? I'm a big believer in the power of the counterintuitive, and sometimes you just got to flow against the tide. Yeah. Touched on it a bit earlier, I particularly think about contact centers. How many businesses, invest in contact centers, and as a consumer, you go, this experience is awful. Yeah. It's truly awful, and it's clearly been outsourced. And you know why they've done it, right? All the reasons why they've done it have been sound business reasons. And it's because they measure based on contact center, typical measures of what they believe to be effective. The reality for the consumer is about as far from effective as you can be. It's horrendous. And at John Lewis, we made those errors. And as a consequence, one of the things we really struggled with was how we handled complaints. So there was the kind of complaints themselves, which were typically driven out of refunds and delivery and whatever. But then there was how do we handle them? And one of the single biggest issues was no one's called me back.
Mm.
I was apoplectic that it was like, this is John Lewis. Like, why are we not calling people back? And it's such a simple question. You'd think there'd be a simple answer, and there never was. And it was because we'd outsourced, because we'd allowed our different cultures to be built up, where frankly, in those cultures, those contact center cultures, they just didn't understand why it matters.
Yeah.
You asked a John Lewis partner, they got it straight away. Like, of course, because it's in their DNA. And so, so I think, therefore, how do you change that as a marketer? We're going to measure it differently. That is not effectiveness. Our effectiveness looks different, so that we're going to measure success differently. And hence as I said earlier, you've got to get the measurement framework clear upstream.
Totally. I had this insane situation recently I had a big problem with my bank, and in the chat, I asked for the complaints procedure so I could submit a complaint. And didn't hear back. And I was like, that's a bit weird. And I got this automated email going, thanks for your complaint that has been submitted. We'll get back to you in the next 72 hours. I'm like, I haven't written my complaint yet. I've asked for it, right? And then just this morning, I got your complaint's been resolved automated letter as well. Like, that's interesting. So they don't know my complaint, but they've resolved it. And I got a third email from the ombudsman, I think that's what you call it, isn't it? They're saying, your complaint's now been referred to the financial conduct or whatever. And we've assessed it and we've concluded your complaint will be upheld. Like, well, I'd love to know what it is I've complained about, but I'm very glad you agree with my complaint that you've never heard. It was just like, I'd obviously triggered some automated process that just set itself efficiently running away, and no one phoned me up. No one asked me what my complaint was. But anyway.
Well, that's one of the things marketers should be doing now, right? Customer experience mapping.
Yes, totally.
Shining a light or putting a mirror back in the organization and being the owner of telling the truth about how it really is as a customer. So important.
There's a good argument for customer service to be in marketing, actually, because you get to hear all that, don't you? And you get first-hand experience of what's
you do. And
working.
Actually, as part of my role now at The Entertainer, I think it's really important. John Lewis, I was responsible for customer experience, not the operational delivery. And actually that created quite a healthy tension, actually. So there was the kind of guy who headed up operations was responsible for the contact centers and so on. But my job was to bring the insight to bear to kind of tell the story of what was really going on. And so, the experience mapping and so on sat with us. And having that we had a great relationship, actually, but being able to be really honest with each other about what was really going on and getting beyond all the kind of classic dashboards to really what's happening is so important.
Now, you've done some very high profile roles in consumer-led businesses. You've got Virgin Trains, you've got obviously John Lewis for many, many years. And then you had a little detour into the world of B2B.
Yeah.
So I'm fascinated. What's your conclusion, having gone into sort of financial services B2B for a couple of years? What did you take out from that time?
Do you know what? One of the reason I went, Sage is a brilliant business, and as I said, it's got an incredible purpose around championing small businesses. And funnily enough, the reason I went there, and the reason I enjoyed it is because the principles are the same. And the thought that I really hate the phrase B2B. I just think I hate all acronyms, but I really try and avoid using them. D2C, B2B, it's all nonsense. And the reason I don't like it is it dehumanizes what really we're talking about. And if I think about a small business, and in the UK, a typical Sage entry level Sage customer's got maybe 3 employees, maybe less, 3 to 5, let's say. So they've set up a business, whatever it is, a barber or a grocer or a deli or whatever, and they've put their lives on the line. They put money into it. They're taking great risk. They're probably being kept up every night. And things like tax and getting your accounts right and paying your people on time and having, being able to meet kind of all the HR regulations and so on is the kind of thing that keep those people awake. That's invariably not the reason why they set up their business, right? You don't become a barber or a hairdresser or whatever it is to become an expert in tax. And so what Sage does brilliantly is address all that. It takes all of that away to allow you to focus on the thing that you set up the business for in the first place. And so that's the kind of human truth that I bought into and that Sage thrives on. And it is, it's got real humanity at its heart. And even if you go up to the other end of the spectrum, Sage also serves medium-sized businesses, which might be more like 500 employees, and the customer might be a CFO or a chief HR officer or a chief people officer. And still the insight said the same thing, which is that fundamentally, if you're a CFO, you don't suddenly stop becoming a human when you step over the threshold and you enter the business. And you're the same person. So you don't suddenly become an amorphous business. You're a human being. And so that humanity and that connection is just as important. So that's the insight, is that it's really not that different.
I couldn't agree with you more, actually. If anything, I think it's more emotional. I mean, if I take my experience with this banking problem, they suspended my account for a few days.
Yeah.
That was seriously scary. They were asking me for tax information and all sorts of stuff. And I'm like, what's going on? Am I in trouble? What's happening?
Yeah.
Can't access my money for a few days.
There's a lot more at stake.
It was a huge amount at stake. It was really, it's quite distressing. Whether I switch toothpaste from one brand to another, it's like, well, whatever. I might, one day do one day do the next. But like, if you're messing with my bank or accounting, or or even if in a career when you're making a very big decision on which agency to hire or something, for account, these are big decisions that can make a huge impact.
Incredibly human.
It's very emotional. They're very emotional, aren't they? Very human.
Yeah.
And we suddenly get all rational and think it's.
B2B, therefore it's about the funnel. It's all about the funnel.
The funnel, yes, indeed. We'll kill some more acronyms before we're done. Look, I'd love to round up by talking about the Marketing Society, because, of course, you're chair of the Marketing Society. Great organisation.
Yeah.
Tell us what the vision of the organisation is and how you're helping marketers be more successful.
Well, the Marketing Society is this incredible organisation. It's been around over 60 years, and I feel very proud to have been chair. I'm chair for about 6 years now, and the reason I do it is because our mission is very straightforward. We touched on it a bit in terms of marketing capability and being the lone voice in the room. And so much of that is about confidence, and you draw confidence from capability. And so what we do is we create the opportunities for marketeers to build that confidence. And we want them to do well in their careers and also do good in society and in their businesses. And in the industry, and so what we do is we create the opportunities like the connections, the networking, the conversations, and also the learning opportunities to be able to challenge yourself, to learn more, and to kind of become the most effective marketer you can be. That's what the society has always been about, and that's why I've been so proud to sort of chair it. And if I think about some of the programs we have in place, we have one that's called Ones to Watch, where we ask our members to nominate a couple of people from their business who are the kind of up and coming stars who might be a bit rough around the edges and maybe not had the development that they deserve, but they've got the latent capability. And so we bring them together with others. They have kind of like-mindedness. They have lots of sharing, connection. They get incredible learning from people from all walks of our industry, and it's all for free. And then we've got at the other end of the spectrum, the Marketing Leaders Program, where we take people who are just about to make that shift up to CMO. And maybe, as we've been talking about, making the shift from being a real functional leader and a sort of master of your craft into being a kind of more generalist leader and on a board. And so we give them the skills and the coaching, mentoring. They meet incredible people and get great learning to be able to make that shift. And so that's what we're there for. We're entirely in service of our members. It's not for profit, and it's just a brilliant organisation to be part of, and it's global as well. I think our heart's in England, in the UK. Incredible community in Scotland, but now we're huge in the Middle East and the Far East and New York and so on. So yeah, love it.
Yeah, I'm a big fan, because I think marketing as a profession is not particularly structured, is it? In terms of, if you're an accountant, you've got do your ACCA or whatever, don't you? And you've got your professional organisations, and it's a lot more managed for you. Whereas marketing, thankfully now we've got training courses like Ritson's MBA and things like that. And one of the reasons of the podcast actually is just to disseminate such great information and experience out to people so that you can kind of learn. But I think there definitely needs to be more, because it's marketing is a kind of one of those careers that you sort of learn on the job a bit more than other careers, don't you? There's not many textbooks or courses that that other industries have that you might do. So I think
there's a sort of sense that it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. The sense that almost anyone can do it.
Yeah.
You're like, no, that's not the case.
Yeah.
And so, I think professionalizing marketing and as you say, taking a bit more of a structured approach is really important. And that's certainly one of the things that we do at the society.
And the network as well, I think. If I've looked back at the accelerating moments in my career, most of them have been down to the network.
Yeah.
Where I've met the right person that's been able to give me the coaching or the introduction or the support to go and be brave and do something next. Because there are. I remember this weird feeling. I'm back in Britain years ago, where I wanted to kind of create a new division to manage innovation separately to the main organisation. Because I was like, well, when innovation launched in the big mothership, to use your John Lewis phrase, it often died after a year. And I'm like, oh, damn, this isn't good. If only there was a team that thought about it over 3 to 5 years and were focused on it 24/7, not just for 1 month when it got the company kind of calendar block in the spreadsheet sort of thing. I was like, come on. Anyway, but when I did that, I felt really lonely because I felt like no one else around knew what I was doing and understood my challenges. And I met Adam Morgan, who wrote Eat the Big Fish.
Yeah.
And then, he sort of, invited me to a few events and we met for coffee from time to time. It was great. I was like, you talk to loads of companies that are all trying to tackle this same issue. I'm like, brilliant. So I think that creating that community.
Well, that's why we say connections. We use the word community a lot and actually not networking, because networking has become a thing.
Bit
right?
transactional,
isn't
it? Yeah.
Well, I think it's scary for lots of people.
Yeah.
I mean, it depends on how you're built. I mean, I'm an extrovert. I love walking into a room and meeting new people, but that's not for everybody.
Most people know, yeah.
And so, but creating the opportunity to meet like-minded people and deal with that loneliness you mentioned, it's a real thing, which is you sort of feeling that this is my only I have this problem. And invariably, that's just not the case. So spending time with like-minded people, sharing the problem with peers, so important. I think it's probably the thing that we do that's most important.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. So final question then, just to end, a bit of fun then. So tell everyone what job you've got now, because I think a lot of people will enjoy this in terms of what you're getting up to these days.
Yeah, so I'm working right now at a business called The Entertainer, which is a toy shop business. It started with one toy shop in Amersham in Buckinghamshire 40 years ago, and it's still owned by the family, the Grant family. A guy called Gary Grant invented it, the business, and he's still there. It's wholly owned by them. And so I'm Chief Customer Officer there at the moment. And so we've got 160 shops here in the UK, 250 franchises abroad. And we've just done a massive deal with Tesco. So and every Tesco in the country by about October, the toy department will be run by The Entertainer. And we also own the Early Learning Centre, which is an incredible brand. It's 50 years old this year. So I feel really privileged to actually get to play with some toys for your job, right? I do. My daughter, I've got 4 kids, but my youngest is 4. And she by the way, thinks I work at The Container. I've decided not to correct her because I just love it every time she says brilliant. It. So when I go to The Container and she sees that we have themed rooms. So she asked me can you take pictures of the rooms? So the other day I was in a Sylvanian family's room. Been in a Minions room, a Barbie room, and she just loves. She thinks I've got
the best job
ever.
in the world.
In fact, it's not a job. This cannot.
This is like playtime.
I want to start work if this is what a job looks like. So yeah, so she absolutely.
So when it comes to bring your daughter to work day, she's like hands up straight away.
Oh my God, absolutely. She will be there.
Every day is bring your daughter.
She will be there with bells on.
Brilliant. Craig, it's been a real blast. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It's been great having you on. Thank you very much for listening or watching Uncensored CMO. I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, please do hit the subscribe button wherever you get your podcast. If you're watching, hit subscribe there as well. I'd also love to get a review. Reviews make a big difference on other people discovering the show. So please do leave a review wherever you get your podcast. If you want to contact me, you can do. I'm over on X at Uncensored CMO or on LinkedIn where I'm under my own name, John Evans. Thanks for listening and watching. I'll see you next time.